All right, y'all. Welcome to another round of FOIA Friday, a community podcast about all things FOIA and public records. We have two excellent guests today, Elizabeth Clemons, who is the research director at Sunlight Search, and Sammy Sussman, who is a local investigations fellow at the New York Times. Yeah, I'm going to kick us off by going right to the tip sheet, which I dropped in the chat, and if you don't see it and need it, just let me know, and I'll keep pasting the link there. Um, this is what we got on the agenda for this week. First, I want to start with some updates. Like I talked about in our last FOIA Friday call, we've been tracking down Brady lists across the country. This started with some work that Sammy and a few other reporters were working on in New York. So you'll get to hear from Sammy about that a little later. But now we want to expand it to states across the country. So we put out a call out on Muckrock at the end of last year asking readers where they wanted us to file more requests. And at the beginning of the year, we started filing those requests, and we're already getting responses back in different states. You can see here on the side of this article that I linked to, we have some of the initial places we filed to in Florida, Washington, Ohio, and we're already seeing some states are responding a lot quicker and more extensively than others, and might end up doubling down in those states to get more records. For example, Florida has been pretty great for us, and has been Ohio, and some of these states and counties in these states are places that haven't released any of these types of records before. So go check out this crowdsourced FOIA project. The call out is still up and linked in here somewhere. Oh, here we go. If you have any other ideas for places that we should file across the country, let us know. You can find the link in this article in the embed right here. And we'll go and we'll file that request for you. And once we do, we'll send you an email with a link to the request. So we got lots more requests to file. And if you've send us a place in this call out and we haven't filed yet, we will in the next couple months. And like I said, we'll send you the link. Yeah, we received redocs already in Miami and Seattle. And Sammy and I have been working on cleaning up a lot of the documents that we've gotten in New York State. Oops, that's to the uh, newsletter, but Police Files NY is where you can find what we've published so far. We've gotten tons of documents, and what we really want to do is make sure they're cleaned up and organized across the state of New York so people can actually access them and explore and find specific officers and different troops across the state. So we're working just on the state troops right now, but we'll eventually get to the local departments as well. Um, on the horizon, we are approaching Sunshine Week in just a couple weeks. And for Sunshine Week, that means for Muckrock, we have the 2025 Foilies coming up. That is the worst in transparency or the best and worst in transparency, depending how you look at it. For the year, we put together a list of really egregious records denials and enormous fees and other fails in the FOIA world. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming up soon. And during Sunshine Week on March 13th, the Data Liberation Project will have a volunteer update and orientation call. So if you're interested in getting involved in the Data Liberation Project, hop onto that call and you can figure out where to plug in, what sort of things we're working on right now, and where we could use your help. A lot of that call will probably be focused on archiving data and well, federal data and responding to the different changes that are happening right now with the federal government taking down or changing federal data sets. That's something that a lot of our volunteers are interested in. But we'll also be talking about some of the smaller data sets we've got back in the last couple months and getting those out the door to publish. So yeah, if you're interested in the Data Liberation Project and learning more, join the call and also follow that link to join the Muckrock Slack and the public Data Liberation channel. On that same day is Document Cloud office hours. So if you are working on Document Cloud and have questions about your documents, find your way to office hours with my colleagues. So for today, we're going to talk about the question of the week, which is how you background private businesses, especially when the owner is a local elected official. This question comes from Juliet Ryle, who I think saw join the call, which is awesome. She asked this, I think, about a month ago, and I brought Elizabeth on, who is much more of an expert in this, to answer the question. And then we're going to move to the topic of the week, which is suing for public records. People have asked about this in FOIA Friday after FOIA Friday for the last several months. So we're finally getting to answer the question, and that's why we have Sammy Sussman, who's actually done this. I have not. And he's going to talk through how that worked. So yeah, without any further ado, now I'm going to toss it to Elizabeth, who's going to guide you through backgrounding private businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, Dylan. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Clemons. I'm Director of Research and Training at Sunlight Research Center. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research org, and we're here to help you. So we help out different newsrooms with research requests, but then we also have trainings every month with different topics and themes to help you sharpen your investigative skills. So I'm going to put a link to our website in the chat so you all can check us out if you don't know about us yet. But essentially, question today is about investigating private businesses. And I think, as we all know, that's really hard to find information there. And if you Google like how to find information on a private business, oftentimes the results are look at the web page. So not very helpful. But today I want to go into a couple of different examples. I'm not going to go into a ton because there's not that much time, but also because in the month of March, we have a whole training from a veteran private investigator and a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative business journalist on how to investigate different businesses. So I'll send a link to that at the end of my chatting with a discount code for all of you guys to sign up if you're keen to join that. But essentially at Sunlight, we kind of approach investigating businesses with like three different categories in mind in the way of, finding information on potential misconduct, looking for assets connected to the company, and then also looking at connections to different people and to different businesses. So, and so let me start with looking at misconduct, and I'll share my screen. Here we go. So one example, when we think about misconduct, this is also an example looking at a politician, Joseph Bunyan Harding. He had this company incorporated in Florida called the Vac Shack. And first, I'm going to start by showing you all the Secretary of State documents here. So here we can see that there were annual reports filed. In Florida, you're required to file annual reports every single year. So you can see the last one is in 2017, and then there were no filings between 17 and 2020, and it was reinstated in 2020. And this date is key to pay attention to, December 16th. And then if we go to USA Spending, so this is one really good place to look for information on private companies, because here you can see different grants, direct payments, loans from the federal government to these private companies. And so here we plug in the name of the company and can see details on this loan, click on this ID, can verify that it's like the correct address, link to that business, and can scroll down and see details on the face value of the loan, which is 150,000, and it was submitted on the 21st of December. And so this is something that outright wouldn't show you like blatant misconduct, but it would lead you to ask some questions of, okay, this company was reincorporated 5 days prior to getting $150,000 as a loan from the federal government. So this would lead you to ask some questions on, is this company actually functioning? And like find information on if there is misconduct and if this like receiving of this money is improper. Another way to find misconduct is always looking at litigation, looking at court cases, search for the name of the individual politician that you're looking for, but then also for the name of that company and like search for it in text so that you could see if it's referenced in any court documents. Another thing I want to point out too is OSHA. So this is Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And here you can type in the name of the establishment and find out different, yet again, private companies and public that have had like complaints filed against them. Another one is the National Labor Relations Board. Um, and here, yet again, you can search different cases and you can find information on so the NLRB is for the protection of private sector rights. And so here you can find information on like complaints against different companies for um, employees of private sector companies. And then, okay, the next category that I want to talk about is looking at connections of the company with different people or different businesses. And so one really great place to search, I'm sure you're all familiar with the SEC, still search on the SEC for private companies. And I always want to point out here, you can search in like the company name or the ticker CIK number. But what you want to search is in the document word or phrase. So this is an in-text search. And here you can see the name of a company, or you can type in the name of the politician, and you can see connections to different public larger companies or private companies that are like above a certain they're like above a certain size. And so here you can find information on both private companies and even nonprofits that are connected to these companies. So always look at the SEC, even though generally it's for private companies and it's for public companies and large private companies. Other thing I want to mention too is that as we see here, there are always addresses, well, not always, there are often addresses that you can look at from the Secretary of State documents. So take those and search for those addresses on different, you can search on like Google Maps, Google Street View, but also search for them on property records to see any other connections that you can find with different people and different businesses as well. The last category that I want to talk about, thinking about like assets connected to a business. First, I want to draw everyone's attention to UCC filings. So these are Uniform Commercial Code filings. And these allow you to see if any companies connected with the individual are debtors or lenders. And so here, for example, this is a politician based in New York. So we searched for him and looked for the address connected to him. And so after doing that, this is the address connected to this specific politician, and we could find two different UCC filings. And if you scroll down here, the most interesting part of these is that it gives details on collateral. And I'm going to show you two different examples. So here, this collateral has specific tractors, loaders, and mowers. But then this is for the same company, and it's like way more broad. It's talking about like all inventory, equipment, farm equipment, etc. But what's really helpful is that this in particular was a private company that was hard to get information on. But using this, we could have an understanding of like assets that this company owned. And then we could look these up and we could get the value of them. And having the value of this is really helpful because that gives you an understanding of the amount of the loan. So the amount of the loan detailed in UCC filings will always be slightly less than the amount of the collateral. So it won't give you a specific number, but it gives you an idea. And so these are kind of like overview UCC filings, but sometimes when you look up UCC filings, you'll find like whole dockets. And those are so helpful because it'll detail the exact amount of the loan. It'll give you way more details on the collateral listed. And sometimes even like there was another case when we were looking at a UCC filed between an individual and an LLC that he was associated with, similar to this. And listed in that was the individual's interest in a third UCC that had not been disclosed before. And so then through kind of like the chain of UCC filings, we were able to track down the property ownership of that specific LLC that the individual hadn't disclosed previously. Don't know if that description made sense to everyone, but I can like write it out and put it in the chat after this. And there have also been other interesting cases where you'll look at a UCC filing and in the financing statement, things like fine art have been listed as collateral. So that's always interesting to see because it gives you an idea of both the assets of the company, but then also potentially the assets of the individual that maybe haven't been disclosed previously. Lastly, always check the US tax court. Here you can see if a company petitions or has petitioned to reduce their taxes. And these filings can be super revealing about the finances and the assets of the company. And so here you can search here for cases. Um, but one other thing I want to bring up um, is that we should all be keeping in mind that we have a new administration. And so the rules and regulations around like LLC disclosure and even what's disclosed on the SEC and other government databases is going to change. I can send some different articles that I found online about both people like theorizing about how things will change and then also information on different requests that the chairman of the SEC has like filed so far. And even I think it was roughly 10 days ago, there was an executive order that was requiring DOGE and OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, to provide a list of regulation that are burdensome specifically for small businesses and private businesses. So that might change the access we have to information as well. And so that's an important thing for us to pay attention to. And another thing that the SEC, which given we all know the SEC is for public and large private companies, but the SEC is trying to change is the ease for investors to invest in different businesses. So that might make it a little bit more difficult for us to gain information about connections of investors to certain businesses. So keep in mind, this is something that we should be paying attention to, especially in the next couple of weeks, because access could change. But this was kind of an overview because I would love for you all to join our training, which we'll have the first training next Friday on investigating businesses. And I'm going to put the link to that and the code for that in the chat right now.
Thank you
Does
so
anyone
much, Elizabeth. Just to
Yeah.
repeat back to you some of the resources you mentioned, you said start at the Secretary of State database for your state. Then at some point there was UCC, but before that was loans.
Mhm. Wait, do you want me to go through it now? I
Yeah,
can even.
yeah, yeah.
So always check Secretary of State for your state, but not only your state, always check for Florida, Nevada, Texas, Delaware. Always check in those states. And then check on USA spending. You can plug in the name of different businesses that you know are connected to your individual. You can also plug in the name of the individual if you're trying to find them listed as like a registered agent. So that's USA spending. And then you want to look at, let's see here, you want to look at OSHA. You want to look at NLRB. Always want to look at the SEC. UCC filings. There's some different data or like websites online that give you lists of the different links for UCC filings based on the state, but there aren't UCC filings like you can't go to like uccfilings.gov, for example. And so you have to look based off the state. Um, and then lastly, there's also US tax court. And so I'll put all the links in the chat as Sammy and Dylan are talking.
Awesome. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions for Elizabeth, she has to jump before the end of this call, but you can drop them in the chat and I will make sure that I ask Elizabeth next time I talk to her because we are working on several things right now together that we have to talk anyways. And so I'll ask her the questions and then bring back the answers in the next FOIA Friday.
I can also, if anyone wants to contact me directly, I'll put my email in this chat. Feel free to contact me directly with questions, or yet again, if you want to join our trainings, reach out to me. And Juliet too, I think you were the one who asked the question. If you'd like to like hop on a call and go into any of this in more detail, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Elizabeth. All right, Sammy, let's talk about suing for public records. Where should we start? Should we start with what the request was in the first place? I think that's probably the best place to
Yeah,
start.
I think we'll start with that. And I'd like to first talk about a town where I pretty explicitly threatened to sue, but didn't end up suing because the mere threat of it kind of got me the records that I was looking for in the time that I wanted. Because I think the first thing to realize is like lawsuits take a lot of time and significant, not only time, but resources. You have to serve people and drive to wherever they are. You have to pay for all the filing. So we'll start with this case here. Let me share my screen really quickly. So
And
as
Sammy, while you're about to share your screen, I'll actually add the disclaimer here verbally that we have in the notes, which is that neither Sammy and I are licensed attorneys and cannot give you legal advice. So these notes that you'll see in the tip sheet are from David Collier and Jorge Roas's awesome 2017 IRE presentation. So check out those notes. They're also not legal advice, and anything that we say out loud right now is also not legal advice. But Sammy's experiences, I think, will give you a good idea of what to expect if you ever get to this point.
And I think just we should also say too that this is going to be pretty New York specific. So some of the specifics of the processes might change depending on the state that you're in. But here, so I'll show you as we, as Dylan kind of alluded to when talking about this project overall, I've been requesting just police misconduct records and Brady files in, well, I guess police disciplinary records more broadly, of all 540 law enforcement agencies in New York State. And then in addition, the Brady lists and Brady records, which are the, police misconduct records that rise to a certain point where a DA would have to disclose them in a criminal file. And I've requested those from all 63 county DAs in New York State. So as you'll see here, back in, I guess it was April 2024, so coming up in a year, I got around to this town, Camillus, in upstate, kind of near Albany, and I filed just this 4-part request with them. So Brady lists, spreadsheets that they might have, because some of the bigger departments will keep organized spreadsheets of their police records, then disciplinary files, and then disclosures that they might have. So I filed this in April 2024. I got this response from their police chief. It was a pretty, baseline response. He repeated back to me what I had filed. He said that a determination will be made by May 21st. And then some random town employee thanked the chief for sending that to me. So then if you're going to file, hundreds of requests like this, I tend to code kind of in the background, and I just have a couple spreadsheets where I track my requests, and then every 3 or 4 months I send out a new round of requests that people haven't, or follow-up emails, whatever. So I sent a follow-up request to Camillus, which I accidentally sent as a new request for the same records. I just repeated the request. And this was back in, I think it was in November. Sorry, I forwarded this to myself because it was on a different email. One tip is like if you're going to do FOIAs by email, maybe create a second email to track them. Now I have like a Gmail that's sammysussman.records. So now I can have a separate email for all my stuff and then check that once a week and all this. But I filed it in November and I got this response from their town clerk saying that my FOIA request was delivered to someone else. I didn't really understand that. But she told me that to her knowledge, approximately 6 hours of work had been done to date on the request that I filed in April. So from April to November, she was telling me that she had done 6 hours of work and that she now wanted me to pay for those 6 hours and additional fees going forward, which obviously is pretty suspect, just given how, the law works in New York. And then if we go back to my request, I pretty clearly stated that I wanted to be told if the request would exceed $25 in fees. And she was trying to charge me around $35 an hour for 6 hours of work. Right. So it was already a little over $200. I wasn't going to pay this. And I had to be notified before, and there's no way that you can spend, an hour a month and claim that you're acting expeditiously and following kind of the expectations of the statute. So rather than, one way to go about this at this point, obviously, would just be to sue and go through that process. But in New York State, that's going to cost me around $350. In addition, I would have to either pay someone to serve in that jurisdiction, or I would have to go drive there with someone else and have, I've done this with like friends or parents, relatives, whatever, where they serve and they get out of the car and give it, but you as the plaintiff can't do that. So, or as the petitioner can't do that. So I'd also have to drive to this jurisdiction, hand it over. So instead, I filed an administrative appeal, which you have to do in New York anyway to launch a lawsuit. First, you have to exhaust your administrative options. But here I tried to be incredibly aggressive in my language in this sort of letter. So I, say an appeal of constructive denial and a demand for preservation of records, which isn't actually something that I would litigate, right? I'm probably not going to get back the records that I'm demanding, but I kind of just want to freak them out to make them think that I'm about to sue for this. And you can read in here that, in May, the chief said that he would get back to me on July 31st. I filed a new request erroneously. The town clerk told me that she was unable to process requests from Muckrock. That's a whole nother issue. But then she told me, what I've just told you all, that she's trying to charge me, I guess, at $30.03 an hour. Sorry. It was going to take 25 to 30 more hours. She'd already put in 6 hours after over 6 months ago, right? And that the date that they gave me for expected completion was over 3 months old. And so I filed this, and I just say very clearly, like, please promptly provide me with access to the records, or else, kind of explicitly implying that I'm going to sue. I attach as exhibits, as you would in a legal filing, um, the various correspondence that I'm talking about. And what's nice when you can appeal administratively is this goes right to the town's attorney. It's no longer this clerk who I'm having the discussion with in this email thread, but I'm already over here to this guy who's a partner at a law firm in Syracuse, and he represents this town when they get sued. And so within a week, I got this email back saying, sorry for the delay in response. He got my appeal, I guess, when he was on vacation, but he granted my appeal. He waived all the fees. I got the records very quickly. So I think the first thing to say is just don't go right out of the gate and sue. You kind of want to find any way not to do that if you can be aggressive, and if you have some sort of fact pattern like this where you can show that the denial was capricious and arbitrary because they spent 6 hours working over 6 months, right? That they know that they're going to lose that lawsuit. They don't want to be embarrassed further in court. We can kind of resolve things internally, and then I can just get the records. Without it, I guess, being put in the legal filing that would be public. So now let me share my experience actually suing someone. Dylan, do you want to jump in just to talk a bit? I mean, just because you were a part of kind of this reporting process on the department that we actually sued, Chester, but like just from your perspective, that whole process, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing when you told me about this, or the first time you told me about Chester, uh, I think it was such a great story from the get-go, because so many different agencies or so many different district attorneys around New York had complied, and were providing us with records, and this is one that said they didn't have any records. So that was probably immediately suspect to you, and it wasn't until later that we figured out why they originally said that, or some of the reasons that could be why they didn't. They said that they didn't have any records.
Yeah, and I'll send the story that you're talking about to that we ended up
Wait,
publishing.
they
It's
ran
just
up.
so people can kind of look at that as we go through here. But um here's my experience. So in Chester, like I've said, I was filing with every DA in New York, all 63, to ask for these records. And that was my first round of requests before I started going to police departments. So when I file with Chester, after I filed with they're in Orange County, New York. I filed with the Orange County DA. I got back some records that I missed because there's a town and a village of Chester. And this is my mistake. I didn't distinguish between the town and village when I got a response. So I go to the village of Chester. They have like a 16-person department, a really funny website talking about their department's history and the various chiefs and their kids becoming chief and all of that kind of small town, lovely history of this little village police department. So I filed the same request, like you saw before, pretty boilerplate. I guess at this point I was putting it in PDFs and on letterhead, whatever. But same idea where it's just those four criterion, maybe a little more restricted just since 2018 because they're a smaller agency. I get back this response. They say that they'll forward it to the police department. I guess the clerk can't handle it. And then I don't get a response after a month, so I follow up with them again. Unfortunately, with so many, small agencies, you have to, it's kind of, even though the law says that they should be responding to you, the reality is you kind of have to be following up with them. But the chief of police here, this is Timothy McGuire, he writes me back 2 days before the new year to say that in regards to your FOIA request, there are no records. Right? And that's it. And I kind of forget about it. Then, as Dylan knows, we were going back through records and sorting them. And I realized that I missed a document that was actually about the village of Chester Police Department, not the town. And the document is this attorney-client privilege and confidential draft of an internal investigation into a sexual harassment and misconduct complaint against the same chief who responded to me. And the complaint was that an anonymous letter, as you can see here, was sent by a sergeant in the department to the head of the village board and the mayor, saying that the police chief was having an affair and he was inviting a woman to the police station and kicking the officers out so that he could meet this woman. He was driving to her home in his police car and turning off his radio. He was inviting her into his police cruiser and they were driving around town. It's a crazy letter. And included in this document is the fact that the chief himself was interviewed for this investigation, and he provided some of his text messages. So clearly he knows of the records that he's telling me don't exist, right? So what do I do? Obviously, first I go back, I file a new request for emails, other records described in this investigation. Then I refile the same request that I did the first time, and I note that it's a resubmission with an additional component specifically asking for allegations against the chief. Um, now let me find it here. They respond to say that documents are being denied as intra-agency materials. They come up with this argument that like a communication between a police chief and between a mayor are interagency, even though the mayor's office has three people on staff and the police department records unit is this chief and his secretary. And it's become kind of funny because I think they say interagency here, they say interagency letter, and they eventually argue that it's interagency. I think if they wanted to say intra, right, internal, it would make a lot more sense. But they've created this interagency argument. And the only things that they give me here are records of the officer who, Jason Andino, is the then anonymous officer who filed the complaint about the chief. So it starts to lay the groundwork also for this arbitrary and capricious denial thing because I'm requesting any disciplinary records they've ever had. They say anything related to the chief we're going to withhold, but we'll give you just the letters that show that the officer that complained about the chief had three random disciplinary complaints. At one point, he was watching Hulu during a night shift, like just random things about this former sergeant. So I do the same thing that I did in Camillus.
So
Um,
they know you have, they probably assume you have the records or know of the records about the chief, and they give you records about disciplinary conduct related to the officer who filed the letter that sparked the investigation into the chief.
yeah, and again, the letter that he wrote was anonymous, and he never said it was him. And if you read the anonymous letter, it's signed by a majority of the department. But they picked out the person that came forward to say, I represent these group of people. He actually resigned, and I've spoken to him and all of that. That's kind of more on the reporting side, I guess. We can get into that, but I guess at this point, I had also reached out to the chief. I started making calls to people in that department, to former people in that department. This chief used to work in a neighboring department. I'd call his colleagues there, right? As a reporter, I'm already knee deep in like building sources, calling people. They know that I know what's going on, that sort of thing. And, I'm trying to be super transparent also when I'm going through this reporting process, so I'm not really hiding it. I emailed the chief first, that whole thing. So I filed similar idea. I don't know why I said legal action notes here. I guess I thought that would be, I don't know. I hadn't consulted an attorney quite yet, but I do the same thing. I file this document with them, highlighting what I think are the exemptions that they're claiming, and then arguing. I'm starting to build the argument that I'm going to bring in court, but making sure that they see it first. And I do that on both requests. So I guess you can trust me that obviously I appeal the other one as well. Because I
So
have this.
you at this point you had an inkling that you might end up suing for these records.
Yeah, and I had pitched this as just also to be upfront, filing lawsuit in New York costs $350. I knew that I had a contract as a freelancer to write this for New York Focus, and so I was gonna take the 350 out of whatever I was gonna get paid for the article. Once I had pay, it felt like it was worth setting things up to sue. Before that, I also don't know that I want to launch on that and not get at least my time paid for, just as a freelancer. But so I filed those two appeals and they have to respond within 20 business days in New York. So I filed it on August 12th. And sorry, when you file an appeal, they have 20 business days to either give you the records in full, reject them in full, or tell you if they have no option to continue to analyze these records. I'm just owed them within 20 business days if you read the statute. There's extenuating circumstances where they can claim that the request is so extensive that they're going to grant it on a rolling basis, but they have to start providing me with something after 20 days. And it's rare for a village government to argue that there's an extenuating circumstance that's going to be rolling. Like that's basically not going to happen here. So I get this email back the next day saying that this guy's the attorney for the town. He's reviewing it. I say thank you. I highlight a bit more. I write back to say that 10 business days have elapsed and yet I can find no record of any response. He said that a response was sent earlier in this email thread, that they're reviewing the records, which isn't how the statute works. I highlight that. Oh, sorry, I guess it's 10 business days, not 20. But obviously, I'm citing things here. We keep going. I write him again on September 3rd. On September 6th, he said that they're still working on it, not how that works. I send one last email in red stating exactly what I've appealed, what I haven't gotten a response on. Like, there's a specific email that I don't know, is that still being evaluated? What's the status of that appeal? This, that. And then, the village has never acknowledged and seemingly never located specific records. Right? Because, sorry, I should have said that earlier. Our fight right now is over the records about the chief. They're reviewing them. They're saying that they're exempt. But I requested all the disciplinary records in this entire department. If you can just see, what I'm trying to lay out here is like things are making less and less sense as we continue to communicate, and it becomes clear that I need to sue. So I draft a petition. I work with an attorney on like the vague outline of what a petition will be. I have to draft it myself. Luckily, if you're pro se in New York, there's a little bit more leeway. Um, but I draft a petition. I lay out, at least in my view, what's happened here. Talking about, I requested the records. He said, Chester acknowledged it, and then the chief said there are no records. In early July, I became aware of a report already in my possession, which described allegations against the chief. And unfortunately for him, now that this is a legal filing, that report is now public. That's a public record that's available to anyone. It's also in New York State, you don't have to pay for court records. So anyone can go online now and find this chief's misconduct report. And that's as an exhibit here. Then I talk about filing a second request, talk about filing a third request. I talk about how they didn't provide all the records, so I appeal. Right. So yeah, and Dylan, you look like you had a question there.
Yeah, I was
Sorry.
gonna say, and so this isn't overly legal or overly legalese. You are literally just walking through, here's what happened the best that you can because you've been documenting it and following up on each deadline or as often as you can every step of the way.
Yeah, and I also file a ton of exhibits, right? The first FOIA request, the correspondence, the police, the investigative report that I know about the chief, the second request, the correspondence, third request, the correspondence, right? I file exhibits A through N on this, and what I'm told by an attorney who practices a lot of these sort of cases is if you're pro se, the court's going to give you some leeway and kind of the legal argumentation, as you're saying, like citing to for previous cases, but you just want to be as clear as you can for the judge on what happened, right? The more that I can show that something went wrong here when I requested these records, I've never been granted them, and just the law isn't being followed, the more likely that the petition is going to end with me getting the records. And that's kind of all I want. And so I do bring in a little bit of legal argumentation here. Basic things like they failed to fully respond, but then I cite to the Committee of Open Government, just a random request that I can, one of their advisory opinions that I can find online, saying that as a corollary to my obligation as a petitioner to reasonably describe, they have to make a reasonable effort to obtain. And then let me see, there's one instance where I cite to like two or three cases, but again, it's very bare bones here, right? Like I'm not a lawyer. I'm not making these nuanced legal arguments.
Where
Like
did
I
you
cite,
find the cases when you were looking for cases? Like, how
yeah,
did that research process work?
yeah, sure. I mean, this is a 2002 case. It's a pretty big case because like, at least for my argument here, because it's a small village and there's questions over like just how much they have to disclose overall. It's not directly relevant, right? It's not about police records. It's none of the specifics of like the fact pattern here apply, but just there's I'm looking for these vague quotes like a free society is maintained when government is responsive and responsible to the public. Like I'm pulling quotes like this. I'm not pulling nuanced quotes. The attorney that I consult said if he were arguing this, he would have filed a memo of law of 20 pages, furthering my argument that would cite to specific cases and fights over police records and all of this. But I'm pro se. I really want to make this broader argument, citing to cases about Buffalo News, try to cite to, show that some news agencies have fought over these, show that just theoretically I should have access. I found Gould is like the big case from '96 that everyone always cites to. So I had pulled up a couple of legal aid FOIA lawsuits, and they all cite to Gould. So that I'm gonna go to that and just find something. And all I, find in Gould is just that agencies may not assert a blanket exception. I'm not getting into the specifics of how Gould was a fight over 911 records and any of that. Um, and yeah, like as you can see, I'm just naming cases and saying C. I'm not going to be drawing, very nuanced arguments if that makes sense.
And these
Yeah,
are decisions you found just through like a court records database for New York that is
case,
maybe like
yeah,
appellate decisions.
like free versions of case law searching tools. There's, I think it's literally like caselaw.com. It's like Reuters' free version of their, case law searching databases that are available to anyone. But right, it's just a very bare bones filing. It's not super well crafted in a way that I imagine if I paid for an attorney, if someone represented me pro se, they might do that. But my argument hinges more on, you can see it here in 63, right? I'm trying to base my argument more on this thing that these records are of significant public concern. They involve serious allegations of misconduct against Chester's top law enforcement officer involving his alleged on-duty and off-duty misconduct, right? The attorney that I was consulting with was saying that like if you're pro se, if you're doing these sort of cases, most judges are going to get it, and the more that you can show the facts of the case and just exactly what happened, and you're a reporter, you're a citizen, you wanted these, they're not going to be asking you to really get. I mean, I guess if you're challenging a specific redaction, maybe they'll get into that, but for this case where it's just pretty egregious, um, that's my experience here. So then I file that. I have to file a notice of petition, and then I have to show proof of service. So in New York, to actually serve a lawsuit, and this is why it can be helpful to get an attorney because they know how this works, or just to talk to an attorney. Like I would always suggest finding an attorney that can give you half an hour of time just to like get the rudiments of this process. Because I have to go to someone has to go to Chester and give this to them on my behalf. So I drove there with a relative. Here's us in historic downtown Chester, driving there and getting ready to serve them. This is their little police department. I walk in there, town hall's next door. I walk in and hand it to yeah, there's the village hall right next to the police department. Walk in, hand it to the clerk. She signs off on something. So then we publish this reporting. You can read the article, and then the next, like a week later, or 2 weeks later, maybe, a local paper, the Chester Chronicle, I think it is, um, publishes this interview with the same police chief that I've been telling you about. And where is it? Yeah, in here, the McGuire, the police chief, said that he says he offers some statements about what I'm suing over, right? So he says, I was taught that I never had those records. The complaint wasn't made to me. That's why I figured I don't have it. And then he also says um, that he would have to either have a memory of the investigation or task someone with going all through all the hard copy records, which he didn't do. And he explicitly states here that the village relies on hard copy records for personnel records, and there's no digital database for them to go through. Now, the village, unfortunately, 2 days before that, had responded to my lawsuit by filing a affirmation saying that they conducted a digital search for the records that I was seeking, and that had somehow exhausted my request. Yeah, they clearly state here that they searched all their digital archives for responsive records. A week later, in a local newspaper, the chief said that the only way they could do this is to use hard copies. There is no digital database for him to simply type in a keyword to pull up all the records. Right. So then I go back to court. I file an answer highlighting what they've just done. Again, I have to talk to an attorney really quickly to understand how you file a memo of law in opposition to a respondent's motion, but I don't think that this is the most greatly, it's not like if I'm sure that people in law school are going to look at it and think that it's terribly done, or lawyers are going to look at it and think it's terribly done. But as I was told by this attorney, again, there's a really clear fact pattern here, and there's a really clear, I have exhibits that can show there's very clear evidence of just something's going wrong if they're saying in the Chronicle that they need hard copy records and that the records cannot be identified in the method that Chester employed. And then yeah, I'm just waiting on the judge's response to that. So it was $350 driving month to Chester, a lot of emails and a couple documents that I kind of threw together by looking at how others have done it, and that's where I am.
And What do you feel like was actually the most difficult part of the process for you? Because I feel like before you do something like this yourself, even just hearing you walk through all these steps or seeing, you have to serve the actual lawsuit, but someone else besides you has to serve that. And then, when you get a response, you have to file a response and you have to really rigorously think about how you're answering each part of their response and your response. These things seem intimidating or seem like they take a lot of time and resources. What actually was the most challenging for you?
Yeah, I mean, so let's take a step back. I think I'm only going to sue. I mean, just speaking as a freelancer, or now I guess I'm in a fellowship for a year, but functionally, when I was doing this, I was a freelancer. Like, I have to be very, selective with my time. So I would only advise suing if you're in, the most obvious situations like this, where things are being said to you that just contradict what you can find online about statute, right? They have 10 business days to respond to me. It's been a month and I haven't gotten a response. They're telling the court that they've done a digital search for these records. I'm being told, local people who are reading the paper are being told that they're only hard copies. Initially, I file an explicit request for these records. I'm told there are no records, but I have one already in my possession, right? I think that was the first part, is knowing that it's a case where I'm not going to have to dive too much into the case law and make a nuanced argument about this sentence should not have been redacted. I would have liked a more, I would like less redaction. I would like a court to review the redactions. I don't believe in that argument. Like, I think that to start. Then draw upon court records that are already public. I guess, Dylan, next month you're going to talk about this, but a lot of really talented people in New York sue for police records all the time. And so I just draw on all that litigation. Like, I can show you up in Buffalo, at the University of Buffalo, there's a law school that has a First Amendment clinic, and they have a guide online on how do you sue pro se. And they have a case that they really like from Legal Aid. So I downloaded that and looked at that document. I pulled up that Microsoft Word document, had my blank document side by side, and was filling in my facts to kind of match their outline, if that makes sense. Um, does that help? I don't know if that answers it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that answers it, and already kind of goes into the next question, what I was going to ask, which is like, what are some of the biggest pieces of advice that you would give to folks if you were doing this again, based on what you learned this first time around?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can, one thing, the first thing that I learned is just, which actually is maybe this is a weird tip, but look for local attorneys who don't like the town attorney. Because I had one person reach out to me to say that she hates the attorney that's representing the town. And she would love to represent me pro se if this ever actually goes into argumentation, because she thinks this is a great case to make him look bad. And I'm like, not that I want that maybe aggressive person to be representing me, but it's a good way for me to get a lawyer on a phone for an hour. I would also say, like, trying to get people who can answer your basic questions like that. I would hope that in every state there's someone who also just believes in transparency and can answer the basic questions. Besides that, just reading a lot of other cases and making sure that you understand the rudiments of the process. I'd say too, like, the clerk was helpful. I admittedly filed something wrong initially online. I don't know what I'm doing, and getting the clerk's office on the phone was kind of helpful to correct that in a way that I think, sometimes it can seem really scary to pay the $350 and file the document. And I was worried that I have to pay that again and relaunch the lawsuit, and had I screwed things up. And I called the clerk and she was like, "Oh, I can go in and override that. And it's not that big a deal. You're pro se." So I think, I don't know, the legal process can seem super intimidating, but as long as you're really open about the fact that you're doing this as a citizen or as a reporter, and you're just trying to get important records, and you're not, you know, I think people are pretty nice back, or you can find someone who is. Maybe everyone isn't nice, but it's easy to find that person. And then in terms of the document, I think you can be as bare bones or spend as much time as you want in it. Like, my second filing, my memo of law, took maybe 10 hours. I think it was like a Friday and the following Monday that I basically just spent on that. And so I tried to give a slightly more nuanced argument there and cite to more cases. The initial filings, I tried to not spend that much time and just really look at other cases and pull quotes over and um, you know, minimize the amount of time that I was going to have to invest. But
Yeah, I think those are great answers. We're getting close to time, so I want to give folks a few minutes to ask any questions they have for you or for Elizabeth that I can pass on to her, or for me, even though I'm the least qualified of the people that have spoken today on these topics. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself or drop any questions in the chat that you have. While we wait for some questions to come in, I will just add to your point about the attorney who messaged you to say that she dislikes the attorney that represents the town so much that she would be happy to represent you. I completely agree on finding attorneys in and around the area that you're working in to talk to you about things going on, whether it's a judge or another attorney or a lawsuit like this. I think they know each other, they see each other very often in court, and you're likely to find good sources who are willing to talk to you if you just start digging around the people that they're in and out of court with every day. But also, yeah, and to your other tip about not being afraid to make a few mistakes on the way, that's great to hear that the clerk and just the court system in general was pretty patient with you. Because I think the big worry that I would have, or that I think a lot of people would have, is that, everyone knows what they're doing except you, and you're going to ruin it before you even started, and then you've wasted $350 and the case gets thrown out or something happens initially. So that's, I think, heartening to hear that at least in your case, you had a little bit of leeway as a pro se litigant.
And to be clear, I just misfiled something. It wasn't on the online system, I checked the wrong box. It wasn't like I filed the wrong motion or something that's completely so procedurally off that it would have actually affected the case, which is, I assume very possible. I also think, Brian, you did make a really good point here, which is that they have real estate lawyers that also handle these records requests. At least my experience in New York is the law professors that study this, the law students that study this are so much more interested in it than the people that are on the other side and fighting it for these villages, towns, municipalities, whatever. So it's been really helpful to me to reach out to a couple experts. There's a student over at CUNY who had written a thesis about FOIA laws that relates to police records in New York. So they were a great person to call as I was drafting things to ask, like, what are the 5 cases that I should cite to? And I didn't really use the specific quote that they cited, but I kind of just mentioned it in italics with proper citation. But I think that there is kind of a mismatch in a lot of, at least at the local and regional level, between the people that have to deal with us fighting for these records and the small academic and legal and journalistic communities that want to get this stuff very, very urgently. So
Yeah, and in that way, I feel like filing a lawsuit is not, as a pro se litigant, is not unlike being a journalist in general. That often you have to be an expert on a topic in a very quick amount of time and kind of bumble through things, asking other people a lot of questions along the way, and you'll never fully be an expert in that thing. You're not the one who's the expert, but at the very least, you're pulling from a lot of resources and a lot of research and a lot of people around you, and just getting people on the phone to ask questions. So it's that type of skills that I know a lot of people on this call are reporters. A lot of people aren't, but it's the type of skills that I think you spend a lot of time working on as a journalist.
yeah, and I
Um, oh, go ahead.
also, oh no, just to say, like in terms of the comment there, I also think in terms of like vague requests or all of that, I also will look for discrepancies between how different towns handle things. Like I started with Camillus, that other town where I sent that appeal and they immediately sent me back records because it let me know that Chester was an outlier. Like I also think that's just important too, Dylan, is to really know at least that you're on firm footing that something's weird with the specific municipality. We filed with 540 people. I'm not going to sue every one of them. So obviously, like you need to be very, very narrow when you do it, and only when something's really, I mean, even for someone who's not a lawyer, knowing that just what you're experiencing and what you read about how it should unfold online is so far apart is when I would feel comfortable suing. You know what I mean? Like when I know that they're supposed to actually search for records and they didn't, when I know that it should take 10 days, but it's been a month and I haven't heard anything, when I know that there's a record and the guys told me there are no records, that's when I would feel comfortable. Like clearly there's a simple argument to be made.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like, yeah, to kind of answer Brian's question about has anyone sued for things that are related to an office responding to requests and saying that it's overly vague. Um, I don't know if anyone else on the call has any experience with that, but I think the thing I'll say as a requester, and that I'm sure Sammy will say as well, just like you were saying a second ago, is um, when we're filing requests, we're already very sure that we at least know the document exists and hopefully know who owns that document, where it exists physically in a file cabinet or digitally in someone else's file cabinet, so that we don't get the type of response that says this is too vague, and then have to work to clarify it. But Sammy has more to add.
Yeah, two things that I sometimes do, two tricks, ask for a FOIA log. Ask them like, or past 100 FOIAs that they've said are too vague. Like you should see how often they do that. And then one, I think Dylan, you told me this, but one trick is instead of giving, like people always say, give a time limitation. Like easiest way to do it is to get as narrow as possible in terms of time. I would say, Brian, like you can also ask for the last five, whatever document you're seeking, the last five of this document, the last two of this document, the last 10. Sometimes not imposing a time limitation, but actually imposing a record limitation. If I'm doing police records, sometimes I'll say, please go through your officers alphabetically and give me the first five that have a disciplinary complaint. But that way I can kind of force a limitation to make it not burdensome. So, I used to say like past 5 years, but for the NYPD, the past 5 years is going to be huge. So saying get a list of your officers alphabetically, give me the first five and cut off there. At least I can get a sense for what the document's going to look like, how burdensome it actually is.
Yeah, or maybe even there's like a sub part of that document that you're interested in. You can produce an even smaller amount of documents by just asking for part of those initial set of documents that they gave you. Brian, it's interesting that they said your request for FOIA logs was overly vague. If you have those requests and are willing to share them, I would love to take a look at them. You can forward that to me, Dylan@muckrock.com. And yeah, I'd also love to know if you appealed those administratively. And yeah, could be an interesting topic for a future FOIA Friday. Um, I think with that, we're at time. So thank you so much again to Sammy for joining us today. It's been a joy and a pleasure as always, and hopefully we'll have you on sometime in the future to talk about reporting or public records requests.
And yeah, I hope people do this in other states. I know, Dylan, we're trying to expand it. So hopefully if you're interested in what I did in New York, please do it in your state. I think there's really interesting things to learn. So
Yeah, and reach out to us through the call out we have on Muckrock or just at our emails, Dylan@muckrock.com. Sammy's email is out there somewhere. If he wants, he can share it as well. And we'll see you next time on FOIA Friday.